Do not ring the bell, please. One moment. Fascinating. Twist ending. Who knew? I'm glad you came by. I've been wanting to talk with you all day. You see, I am a villain. This is a girl's small t-shirt. You can tell I am a villain because I have my hair slicked back. I defy you to find anyone with a hair slicked back that's not a villain, Pat Riley included. You see, there are only two types of villains. There are those that you love. Take Tom Hanks, two-time Academy Award winner, and his portrayal of that hitman in Road to Perdition. Just something I like about him. Character's despicable and all, but perhaps it's just Tom Hanks. Or take Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight, the best comic book adaptation, I say. His portrayal as the Joker is quite extraordinary, super psychotic and super restrained. Awesome, awe-inspiring in many ways. But then again, his hair isn't necessarily slicked back, but it is green. It's a conundrum for me. But then again, there are ones that you, I dare say, hate. Somebody like Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator. I really can't stand that guy. He's just terrible. I always wondered what that did to his movie career because he's so despicable. I just don't know. I'll talk to him this weekend, I think, when we go camping. Perhaps somebody else like that tyrant god, Byron Hadley, in The Shawshank Redemption. He's awful. He's terrible and maniacal in every way you can think of. Do you know he was also the voice of Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob SquarePants? Nobody ever believes me when I tell them that, but it's quite true. You can look it up if you wish. Wikipedia does not lie. He was also in Highlander with Christopher Lambert, that pre-Tarzan Legend of Greystoke. It's perhaps too deep of a cut here. Speaking of villains, we have on the podcast today Chelsie McCorkle. I'm sure that's some sort of a typo. She's going to be talking about some very interesting things, children literature, villains, and such. Stay tuned, folks. Now, where are those fava beans? Well, most importantly, what are fava beans? Today, wrote this down, I am nonplussed about our next habitué. She is here to cultivate the peduncle of creativity sprinkled with a soupçon of barren curiosity into a literacy harvest. Without compunction or lugubrious perturbation, please welcome Chelsie McCorkle to the podcast, and also perspicacity, bifurcated, obsequious, and clairvoyant.
There's so many words I don't even know in there.
Well, I thought...
So how's your audience ever supposed to know,
well,
too?
What audience?
Did you say lugubrious?
Lugubrious.
I don't know that word.
Don't worry about that. It's not really... A lot of that stuff. I could put bovine in there and, throw myself off in there.
Is it an archaic word?
Stop it. With your...
I know you hate the word archaic.
I hate the word archaic. Yeah. Somebody used that against me, as you know, as a poetry teacher that I had, and said that I was using archaic word because I used the word scape instead of landscape.
I never knew what the reference was that
that's
brought out the
was.
archaic.
It was scape, and she goes, that's a very archaic word to use. And so I don't even go near that word. I don't even use landscape as the format when I'm doing like pictures or anything. Art.
Complete avoidance is the way to process it.
It's all portrait.
Okay.
And that's not archaic. At least I don't think it is. But she was not a very good teacher, so appreciate you coming on to the podcast today.
Yeah, I signed up because we have great conversations.
We do?
Yeah. Without these things.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It was the elevator conversations, which I think at one time that was going to be possibly a name of this podcast, was going to be the elevator conversations, which sounds kind of odd now.
You know when I knew I enjoyed having a conversation with you?
What's that?
It was a Friday, and on Fridays I'm very motivated to go home and start grading because that's kind of my day to get caught up.
Right.
And I got off the elevator and you caught me. And I looked away from a clock. And when I looked back, it had been like an hour and 15 minutes of standing and talking.
That's a long time.
And I was like, oh, that was fun.
That's too long of a time to talk with me.
It truly isn't.
We're learning that.
I left feeling like I just had the most human conversation I've had like all week.
Oddly enough, it's all powered by AI. Oddly.
What isn't now?
What do you like our little setup for you? Because we came in. One of the things I wanted to talk with you about, and one of the things we have talked about, was that you teach a class here at the University of St. Francis on children's literature.
Mm-hmm. My students actually came right here, and they had to pick out books for a couple of assignments that were in our collection.
They did?
Yeah.
What'd they pick out? Anything you can recognize?
I had 30 students in this class. It originally had 20,
25.
and I had to keep 25.
However many you want.
Well, they had to choose something that wasn't already in the syllabus that we were doing as a class. So they were limited in that way because I actually came to this collection and kind of perused, if you will, to kind of build my syllabus.
Perused?
I perused. Maybe that's the word today.
Perused.
I get a word like a day and I use it like too many times that day.
Like ascertain?
I don't know that I've had that one since I was in college.
I ascertain that you use the same word probably too often. And then after a while, you start using the word incorrectly.
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
Can you ascertain me that pencil? You know, you're like, no.
My favorite thing in my
so.
family, though, is when someone questions my grammar, I just say I'm an English professor.
That
and
shuts
then they
it down.
just back off.
Really?
Yeah.
That would double down for me. You come at me with that as your lockdown. I'll be, oh, okay, then I got to say something now. Oh, really? Is that true? Then I'll come up with something like, for example, the word utopia. You've never heard of this word.
Of course not.
You're a big Thomas More fan for some reason?
So I think you're appeased that I knew something you didn't.
I can't believe it.
I think that's what it is.
It's appeasing and a dismay thrown and wrapped in also with a little bit of spite, I think. Yeah. I've used that term. For those of you listening, would you go ahead and tell them, since you know what the word utopia means?
Well, you were really proud that you knew it, and I just interjected and beat you to it. So I think you'd have more pride if you say it.
Let me go because utopia, was Thomas More or was it John More?
Thomas More.
Thomas More created this word. I think it's a combination of Latin and Greek, two different words, and it means no land. In other words, it cannot exist. And I believe this was coined in 1986. Is that right?
1500s.
Whatever. It's somewhere around there. But you threw that at me. I was going to do the lower lip out across my and just kind of walk out, but I was so dismayed that no one ever knows that because it's not necessary to know, I think.
I mean, it depends on what you're talking about, right? Like last week, I had a camp for 6th through 8th graders where they built their own utopia. I certainly didn't tell them Thomas More or 1500s, but
no,
I knew.
You didn't throw that out there?
No, we talked more about, we did talk about the fact that it means no place and how we make a read on that, because that's interesting, right? If it's supposed to be this ideal place, but it is translated to no place, that's kind of tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
what do the kids do with that? What did they create?
Oh, it was so cool. So our humanities world building camp, they blew me away. 6th through 8th graders, I went in with expectations of what we would see. And I had one camper on Monday who said, I really care about pollution. And I'm going to make my world environmentally friendly and think through what technology we need to make that happen, what values as a nation my country is going to have to make that happen. And he stuck to it, and he came up with some really interesting things. I know you came to the exhibit.
I did.
But just that passion. We talked about social justice issues on Monday, too, that they maybe wanted to try to eradicate in their utopias. And I went into that lesson thinking, okay, there's going to be no framework here, all right? 6th through 8th graders. I'm going to have to do a lot of foundation building. And I asked my question, what is a social justice issue? And every single camper knew what I was talking about.
And from 6th to 8th grade?
I don't know about you.
I wouldn't have known that back then.
6th grade, I would have had no clue what that concept was.
I wouldn't have any idea what that.
No.
And they knew what that was up front.
We brainstormed a list on the board, and I kid you not, I had put away maybe 5 minutes for it. 15 minutes later, we were still building.
Really?
Yeah.
One of the things I saw with the students put in there was something about having a strong military and some other things like this, which, again, another thing in 6th to 8th grade, I have no concept, although I did play with G.I. Joes, which I should then, I think, know something about that because I was playing with that.
Yeah.
Was that something you talked about in that camp as well?
We wanted them on the first day to choose, what does your country value? It was a really, because country is synonymous with utopia here, because we had them think country just to make it a little more bite-sized and easier to think, but it really was utopia building. We asked them, what does your country value? Blank and blank. And the student you're referring to said military and tech, and I think came at that not really understanding what he wanted to do with that.
Okay.
But then realized, well, if I advance my military, what does that mean for my country?
Right.
Well, my citizens, maybe military kind of branches and connects with our police force. And he really was starting to pick apart, okay, what is dystopian about what I'm creating, and how do I kind of rein it back into that utopia state? And I was blown away last week, truly.
I was blown away by that too. Just kind of working with them. Did you give them guidelines that you showed them, hey, this is what we're going to do, this is how you're going to put stuff, put buzzwords up there and just kind of throw it all together? Or did they come out of it out of the blue, come out with a lot of the stuff?
I think kind of like a writing classroom, even though this wasn't class, this was camp. I had to keep reminding myself that because they were just so ready with the material. I think I didn't want to stifle anything, so the first day was very loose formed, and then the second day we came and we represented what does education look like in your utopia? Here are some examples. So we were constantly giving them examples, but then they were kind of creating based on something that existed or based on absolutely nothing that existed.
People come at me with a lot of new ideas, and I immediately stifle and poo-poo almost anything I can. Actually, it's a guy that John and I, our producer, John and I work with a guy, Will Wells. I'm going to go ahead and put that name out there right now. He poo-poos every idea you have, and you come away feeling void and empty. So I'm glad to see that you're not doing that, because I work with that every day.
Well, we love
right,
you.
John?
We love you, Will.
It's a terrible, terrible expression. You've taught children's lit here. I got a couple things I want to talk to you about that we talked about in the past. One is children's lit. I also want to talk about the feminist voices in the poetry reading you did back in March. So let's go to the children's lit first. Okay, what do you do in a class like that? You come in, it begins and ends with you got Dr. Seuss, and you come in with Roald Dahl, bada bing, you're done, get an A. Is that it?
Well, definitely two figures that I felt I had to have in the class for obvious reasons,
right.
Because even you know them.
If I do, that's low-hanging fruit.
But I really think I prepped more for this class than I had any class I've ever taught before, because children's lit is not a specialty area that I have or have encountered, but it was something that, I felt really passionate to teach. So I literally met up with Amber Pavlina, the librarian here, and she kind of walked me through this collection, and I spent a lot of time here. But I love literary nonsense, and I think you know that about me.
I do know that.
So I knew I wanted to begin and end with literary nonsense.
With
so
Lewis Carroll.
I ended with Lewis Carroll, and I started with Dr. Seuss.
So Dr. Seuss, who's in the middle of that?
Well, the whole class wasn't literary nonsense. That'd be a very different class, right?
Truly it would be.
But I think, sometimes as a teacher, you bring in selfish aspects of what you enjoy.
Oh, yeah. I've done that plenty of times.
And then if you're a good teacher, I think you build on it, right? It's a starting point. For me, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was the first book that ever caught my imagination.
Is that right?
Oh my goodness. I had a librarian at my elementary who knew I loved this book, and she let me just rent it the whole year, and I would read it over and over and over again.
So you'd go get your ear medicine and sit down and read Lewis Carroll. The thing was about Lewis Carroll, it was the Jabberwocky. As a kid, I might have been 20. I don't know. I was younger than I am today, which is a long time ago. And I would watch the show. There was always a show on CBS that would come out every year. And it was Alice in Wonderland, and they had that big dragon, elephant, something, Jabberwocky, and that was always scary. And then she could see behind the glass, and how scary that was to me.
Yeah, and the Jabberwocky poem is like, for me, like the epitome of nonsense.
Yeah?
Because there are so many like made up words that are trying to subvert language. It's really interesting. And I
could see that.
I was in second grade the first time I read that book. Don't recommend, but I know for a fact I did not understand most of what I was reading, but I was fascinated.
But it is nonsense.
Yeah.
But that's okay.
And I could apply meaning onto it in my second grader mind. And for every page that I understood, there was clearly 5 pages I didn't.
That makes the challenge.
Yeah.
And that's what's fun about that.
But yeah, that was probably my gate into loving reading was that book.
Is Dr. Seuss really nonsense? How does he fit in that? I could see Lewis Carroll being nonsense.
Yeah.
But why is Dr. Seuss?
Well, you actually taught me something about Dr. Seuss that kind of this year.
That doesn't make any sense.
The subversion of language with a mixture of nonsense and a mixture of something that makes maybe a little too much sense. You told me that Dr. Seuss made up the word nerd.
He did.
I didn't know that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we're going tit for tat because you knew the Thomas More thing.
So we're even.
Yeah, I guess we're even.
So by the end of this, we'll see who.
Yeah, he made up the word nerd.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but it's kind of the making up of words. And I think one thing that I always found interesting, I learned in grad school, was literary nonsense. It's not devoid of meaning. A lot of times there's an excess of meaning.
I get you.
Yeah, which is still a fascinating concept to me.
So when you're teaching this in class, got a bunch of students come into class. Do they embrace this in a way they're like, oh, great, children's literature, I can't wait to get involved in this? Or is it something, how do you get them to embrace this? I mean, they've seen it before as a kid, I'm assuming. Yeah. Right.
So it's a cross-listed course, actually. It is Read 275 Children's Lit and English 275 Children's Lit. Okay. So I have a majority of students who want to teach. And so children's literature, right, is kind of more in their wheelhouse. So I think they come with a different interest than I had maybe 7 of my 30 students who wanted it just for the literature course.
Okay.
And so I think because it's a course you're electing to take, it's nice because there's already interest. And it's really about me trying to figure out what they're most interested in so we can talk about it. This semester, I had a lot of students really interested in the way that gender is portrayed in children's literature.
How so?
I had one student come in with a book that she had in this collection, and she said, if you look at the pictures, the girl is in a pink dress every single time, and the boy has a baseball cap on and is wearing blue. And so I asked, what's the date of that book? Like, when was it published? And she's like, the 90s. And we compared with another student's book who was just like the last 5 years. And you didn't have those stereotypes in it. So I think because of that discussion, gender was something that my students really want to talk about. Like, what kind of gender expectations are we setting in children's literature?
That's interesting. You know, what's weird about this is I had an idea to have this interview be done, not necessarily here, but I was going to dress up in a dress, and I was going to have a towel, this yellow towel that we have at home, which I don't think it's really yellow anymore. It used to be. I'm not even sure if it was supposed to be yellow to begin with, but I was going to make pigtails about this, and I thought 2 things. That might not go over very well, and secondly, I can't find a dress this big that I had, because my wife's only 5 feet tall. That's a tough, and I'm not going out and buying one.
I would have been all for it.
Really?
I don't know.
I
don't know if you know this about me, but
should have done it.
Gender is, so if Lewis Carroll and Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was kind of the gate for me being interested in reading and literature, I think gender psychology, I took that class actually here as a student at St. Francis, really made me fascinated with what literature could do with those ideas.
I got you. Well, I had a couple of different ideas, and I was either going to come in as the Phil Hartman character, with the Swedish ponytails or whatever, or like we were talking about with Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos with a low voice like this coming in. I had a lot of ideas, and I just kind of just said, let's just come in as a regular
Ooh,
pretend to be a regular, normal human being.
Regular is a problematic word when we talk about
Standard?
gender, right?
Person, thing.
The choice of your performance.
That's it.
There you go.
What am I trying to do? What am I trying to convey here? And I was just trying to play the nonsense.
Do people in your personal life take you seriously?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm actually a lot more serious at home. If you actually ask my wife, you'd say, what's he like at home? Oh, it's a total. We have total silence and Gregorian chants usually playing in the background.
See,
24/7 is a whole mess.
it's a good thing I don't take you serious.
You don't want to be involved in all that. And everything smells like bleach. Just,
It's a very interesting life. Right?
it's very clean. It's very clean, and everybody hates that or whatever. You and I talked about villains one time in literature. Literature from the idea of something is, well, let's go back to Lucifer or something as a villain that way, or to something like the Joker.
The Disney canon for sure. Like when I was growing up, it's going to fit into what I think you're trying to say, that villains were very clear cut. Right?
Definitive.
Yeah.
Is that a problem in literature? Should they be more dynamic?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if I would classify it as a problem. It's presented an opportunity for me in writing classes because, so the Disney canon, let me just take that. So like in the 90s particularly, right? You have these Disney villains that are normally wearing the dark clothes. They're portrayed in a way so kids can understand, okay, this is the villain before they ever speak. Right? Okay. It's really important that for that audience of kids understands, this is my villain, this is my hero. And I get that. I think in the last, 10 to 20 years, we're seeing this reemergence of old villains where we reimagine them to be more empathetic. And I think it's fascinating for students, for sure, in my classrooms.
How so? Give me an example of that. What is that?
So Sleeping Beauty, the Disney version came out in 1957. Fun fact, I taught the original version of that in children's literature as a fairy tale. Side point.
Okay.
It's called Briar Rose. But even there, the villain is very...
Whoa. There's an original version?
Of Sleeping Beauty.
It's called Briar Rose?
Brothers Grimm.
Is that a Grimm's?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And so they repurposed it?
Disney repurposes everything.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
So how's the dynamic? So you got this villain within Sleeping Beauty.
Mm-hmm. Maleficent. Disney kind of comes and gives her a name. In the Brothers Grimm, she's just the Black Fairy. But you have this dynamic where the villain, there's nothing redeemable about them. They are just a clear-cut villain. And then a few years ago, there's 2 movies out now with Angelina Jolie. You have Maleficent, where it's her story. And you have this idea that, okay, she cares about Aurora, the princess. She has a lot of redeeming qualities where you even understand why she's kind of acting out in the way that she is, and she's being villainous. And I think it's a much more interesting version of the villain whenever they seem more human and not just like an archetype.
So there's a depth.
Yeah.
Does that endear a reader to understand the actions, the mindset of an individual, or are we paying too much attention to their motives and trying to say, oh, it's okay?
I think it's not trying to say it's okay. It's trying to make it more human and relatable, right? I don't know personally in my life anybody who is the 1950s version of Maleficent, who is just evil to be evil, like in my personal life, right? But if I look at the newer version and I say, okay, there's a reason behind that action. There's something about that feels more human, that someone could do me wrong in my life, but maybe they're not just this villainous character I might want to paint them out to be, that there's something human motivating in their actions.
So you don't know what's going on in their life on a daily basis,
Yeah.
so give them a break kind of a thing. But
yeah, but that's interesting, especially when we apply it to literature. And maybe this is that selfish territory again. There's a Shakespeare play, Merchant of Venice, and there's a character, Shylock, who I'm a little bit obsessed with, and I always want to create empathy for him. I always want to say, he's not this clear-cut villain, and I always read into the text, which is a problem, which I don't do when I teach texts. But for my it's why I'll probably never teach that text, because I can't like devoid my personal opinions from what's actually happening.
Yeah.
But I've always been obsessed with trying to say he is an empathetic character. And in grad school, I had people like, we took up like a half of a class one time where I had people who just could not understand where I was coming from.
Well, it's kind of like the, if you've ever seen, was it Amadeus? Thomas Hulse and, what's the guy? F. Murray Abraham, I think his name is. And they had Amadeus to Salieri, and Salieri drives himself crazy and believes that he killed Amadeus, whatever. Is that, no?
No,
You
I don't know this
on that one?
reference.
It's a really good movie.
You
Won
can
a
be
bunch
up
of
again.
Academy. I've got one up on this one. It's really good, but there's a sort of an empathy. Well, let me ask you in a different way. Do you like the villains that you really hate, or do you like the villains that you really love?
I like the villains that I love.
Give me an example. Who do you love as a villain and why?
Oh, that's
And
such a
what
good
makes
question.
him so dreamy?
Well, I already used Shylock, so I'll put him to the side
Right.
for now. Well, before I answer this, I am a huge board game geek. I love modern board games. And there's actually a modern board game called Villainous where you play as the villains, and I
Okay.
love it. So this is you're getting deeper into my soul than you're realizing here.
Okay.
And I'm not trying to say I want to be a villain or anything. I want to understand people.
Is this soul pretty black? Is pretty like a
Yeah.
like a coal?
I
Is that where we're going?
maybe.
Okay. Just want to know where I'm going.
Yeah.
Got the GPS on this.
Well, I have two spectrums for you,
Okay.
and one coming from my children's lit class I just taught. So you brought up Roald Dahl.
Yes.
He wrote Matilda. In Matilda, there are a lot of clear-cut villains, but one is the Trunchbull. I don't know if you know it.
Absolutely.
And she is kind of irredeemable. Like, she does bad things.
Yes.
We don't really ever see why
I don't care why.
she's a clear-cut villain.
Right.
Same could be said for Mr. Wormwood, her father, Matilda's father, right? Clear-cut villain,
But it's Danny DeVito in the movie. I mean,
which is so different from the book.
it's Danny DeVito. You can't go wrong with him.
Yeah. But the book is different, right?
Yeah.
That's one end where there's really nothing that draws you into wanting to know that villain.
So would you hate that villain?
I probably don't use the word hate, but I don't like the Trunchbull,
Okay.
right? She's,
So you're not going to hate all the way. You're going to heavy dislike.
yeah.
Okay.
I don't know that the H word is a word I use in my life.
No?
No.
I think I get that a lot from people.
I think if we go to the other end of the spectrum, I'm really influenced by Disney, and Disney finds its way into all of my classrooms, but you're going to laugh at this. Beauty and the Beast,
Yeah.
Gaston.
I love Gaston.
I love Gaston.
Every last inch of me's covered with hair. And he pulls this thing out there. And especially the other part, like, I'm especially good at expectorating. You don't get to use that word.
No.
And he spits in a guy's face.
But he's a little irredeemable too. Like, there's nothing great about him.
He's got the great hair, though. And
I've read previous versions before Disney, because again, Disney took that story.
from.
Oh, there's so many versions. There's like
Is that right?
5 predating versions
Oh, I didn't know that.
that I'm aware of.
I had no idea about that.
But there's something about Gaston that feels a little more human. Like, he is so trapped in his ego, and that's a very human feeling, right?
Okay.
That we've all experienced. And his tragedy is that he can never escape it. He can never see past it. He can never rise above it. And so he's irredeemable. He's a villain. But there's something attractive about that for me, wanting to understand why is he that way.
You like the bad guys? It's
No,
kind of is that what you're saying?
in literature, I want to. So I minored in psychology, and I
Oh,
think
here we go.
a part of it was like I wanted to know as much as I possibly could about human behavior, so I can like use it in trying to understand
That makes
literature.
sense.
Big
So
nerd.
he had the Trunchbull really doesn't have any redeeming qualities, but Gaston has this little bit of quality to him that you could kind of understand. But he's trapped into this void of hatred and wanting to kill the beast.
Yeah,
What was his gig? Is that was the gig?
he wanted Belle.
Is that what it was?
Yeah,
I haven't seen that movie a lot,
she's the prettiest girl in the village, and so he deserves her.
but
That's-
she is tired of that provincial life.
She
Am I
is.
wrong?
Disney-
Not
the
speaking for
Disneyfied
her,
version.
but from what I understand.
Yeah, but I think so because this is a passion of mine, like just trying to understand like what makes a villain, what makes a hero. I've brought it into my writing classrooms,
Yeah.
and my students really respond to it. So we talk about the role of audience, right? You write in your free time, so
do.
you know, like if I'm writing to audience A or audience B, I'm going to write differently if I'm thinking about writing, right? So I give them one of these clear-cut villains, normally from Disney because it's something they can access easily from their childhood.
Okay.
And I give them a new audience. So your audience is no longer a kid in the 90s. Your audience is a modern 25-year-old who wants to feel empathy. So I give them the motivation. So you
Almost
have to,
like a young adult read kind of thing.
so you need to reimagine this scene with this villain and rewrite it.
So what do they add or take away then from the original narrative? What's different?
Is that the story and the characters remain the same, but the way they're writing it has to change fully when the audience changes.
How so? Give me an example of something.
So like if they're writing to that, well, they're given the original version, right? Because it's normally the 90s Disney version of a villain. And that
Okay.
was for, like we talked about earlier, that kid who needs to understand this is a villain and they need to understand that quick, right? So like Cruella de Vil.
The
Even
hair
though
alone.
there was a movie that was redone, so I have to take her off my list now, giving that villain empathy, proving my point that a modern audience wants the more complicated gray villain. But they have the original. Now, how do you retell that? So before this movie came out, I had a student kind of reimagine Cruella de Vil's childhood and kind of explain why she is the way she is.
What did they add in there that would have said, okay, I get it. This is why, this is their testimony. This is everything why they're doing everything in the future. What did they add?
One example comes to mind. I've taught this probably the last 5 years in classrooms, and it's just it's like a mini activity just to understand the role of audience. But one thing that comes to mind is, well, if we think of Cruella de Vil and we add in the picture of mental illness,
Oh.
right? That
Okay.
changes how I feel about that character. And does that appeal more to this new audience I'm trying to appeal to if I add in that detail?
When did the original one come out? The original one, the cartoon years
I think
ago.
the 60s.
Was the 60s.
I think so.
Mental health is a lot different experience. And it's certainly in the concepts of our modern world a lot more often back then. I don't know if that would have been touched upon that much.
Well, it's interesting because this came about because I like to tell my students in my writing classroom specifically, like, get out of the habit of writing as if your professor is the only audience member for this paper.
That's a good way to do that.
Because if you do that, you're not thinking about all of the choices that lend themselves to you as a writer. And I would say that over and over again, and it just wasn't clicking for a long time. And I would still get that paper that is clearly being written to me.
Yeah.
And so now I have all of my students, after their works cited, after their references, they have to have a bullet point that says, this is my intended audience.
Really?
And it
That's
may,
a good idea.
it's changed the writing and the choices.
So you're a good teacher then. I understand. Is that right?
I
Could one say that?
can have humility and say that I think I'm a really good teacher.
Really?
Yeah.
I couldn't say that.
I'm
a terrible teacher.
I feel very called to it.
I do the old thing like what my dad used to do. He'd say, Eric, can you come outside and help me out with something with the car? And I was probably 10 years old. And he'd say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out. I need you to hold this flashlight onto some point in the car that you didn't know what it was. And he gave you this flashlight that I swear to God must weigh 75 pounds. And it was cast iron. And you'd hold it with your one arm out here. And eventually your arm would start, he would grab a hold of your arm. Now hold it right here. And it was every time you just keep holding your arm up and then eventually, come on. I never did know what he was trying to fix. I think it was actually a secret form of punishment just so that I would never work on cars in the future. I think that's what it is.
Do you have one arm that was stronger than the other?
A
for
lot
that?
stronger. Like my right arm's got this whole deltoid issue now. It's just, I can't hold anything out for any length of time. You talked about the writing center. You're in charge of that now?
I direct
Do
the
you
writing
rule
center.
that with an iron fist?
Sure.
Do you
If that's the image you want of how I
a lot of
direct the writing
smacking
center.
and ruler hitting on hands and such like that? What do the kids come in? They come in with a problem. What's the biggest issues nowadays?
Oh gosh. I will say the writing center is up, especially post-COVID, and like, cause I have numbers from before I was directing it. Post-COVID, it's definitely up, but in the last year, we were up 65% in visits compared to the previous year. So there's more of a need for it for sure. It's hard to say because I think there's a little bit of everything, because our writing center is built in the way that you can come if you need help brainstorming, right? You might not have anything written. If you have a draft of something, we always ask specifically, what do you think you need help with? It's not this idea of coming in with a whole draft and throwing it at a writing consultant and saying,
Fix it, right?
Fix it.
Yeah.
In fact, that's why we call ourselves consultants, not tutors. Because tutor, we don't know everything and bestow it upon you. A consultant, we're working alongside you.
I didn't know they called you consultants.
Mm-hmm.
Are you paid a fee?
Well,
Are you on a retainer?
it's part of my job description to be writing
Is it
center
really?
Director. I get a
didn't know
course
that.
release for it. But I hire consultants. So I have 3 peer consultants who are all students, and then 1 professional consultant who has a master's degree who helps.
Wow.
But I think the main thing that I've noticed this last year is something I call unpacking ideas. Like that, when I bring up an idea, am I explaining it fully before I move on?
Okay. So if you're going through somebody with a research paper, they totally want to come out with the idea, with all the product, all the concept, or whatever, and just throw it out on the table. Is that what you're talking about, unpacking?
Yeah, I think I see it more and more. So I started teaching here in 2015, and I think each year I see it more, that there's a disconnect in thinking through who that audience is.
Okay.
And what does my audience already know, and what do I need to explain to them? Students in my class, they always laugh when I say this, but I have a golden rule, and it's pretend your reader's dumb.
Okay.
Which always gets a good giggle when I say it in class the first time. But if you are, you're gonna explain what's already in your head as a writer, right?
So explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old.
It sounds silly, but it's a really good rule.
It makes some sense, though. Because there's a lot of times where I'll read research a couple different times, and I don't have any idea what these big words. You spend a lot of your time just to try to define what a few words are, because that's kind of the crux of the research that comes through there. I've noticed that over the last 10 years. I'm like, I don't know what this means.
Kind of archaic.
It's very, I don't use that word because it hurts. It hurts in my heart, my soul. My soul is not charcoal like certain people I know. So the writing center is a valuable tool here. Do they use it? Do they come in expecting you to fix all their problems when Grammarly and Word and everything else can't do it?
So I actually, I do about 3 hours a week of actual consultation, and I just work with grad students. And I had a grad student who was using Grammarly a lot. And then we had our first meeting this fall, and I literally met with her every other week the entire academic year, because in her own words, right, Grammarly, it's not a bad tool. I'm going to put it out there. It's not a bad tool, but it's very two-dimensional in what it's going to help with.
Oh, I agree with you. What about the Chat GPT stuff that's out there?
Oh, gosh.
Does that complicate this process? Does it make it easier for you? Does it make it easier for the students?
I think there's a lot of complication, and I know in my field specifically. So I went to a conference in Chicago in February, and there was a whole like pop-up conversation about this that everybody was welcome to attend. And I went to it thinking I was going to, get all the answers. Right? It was very idealistic. There are so many conflicting thoughts and ideas that I left after 10 minutes. I realized it was not the platform to kind of understand the issue.
Really?
Yes. People are very divided.
There's a lot of for and a lot against.
I think there needs to be a lot of pre-education in what ChatGPT is as a tool.
Okay. I could see that.
And what it's not.
I've had some experience. We had talked about one of our meetings. We talked about being reincarnated as a cucumber. I don't know why. I have no idea where this came from. And I went to ChatGPT, the first thing I ever did, write me a song about getting reincarnated as a cucumber. and I sent it to everybody, and I probably should just went ahead and take credit for it, I guess, the hack that I am. And it came off and it was all right. It actually was, it's probably a better representation of that song that I could have written myself.
Yeah.
I'm not a songwriter so much, but I was kind of amazed at how quickly it came up with.
Could it have sparked new ideas for you?
It sparked an animosity is what it sparked, because I was much like people that know what the word utopia means. It's the same exact feeling. I can't beat somebody to the kick on that. You also did it back in March. This, is it called Feminist Voices?
Feminism, Voices, and Visions.
Oh, I was way off on that.
It used to be Voices of Feminism.
Okay, so I think that's where I got that from.
Yeah, but then there was this pull to kind of include art and literature, so it became Feminism, Voices, and Visions.
Now you come off with this, you do it over at Ackett's Hall.
We did this year.
This year. What was the intention of this? Was it just to get everybody to get together? Was it a shared vision, a shared voice? What did you want to do with it?
Well, this was not the first year for it, and I am not the originator of it. Before me, there's 3 women specifically that I've had chances to work with who kind of spearheaded it, and it became mine this year. So there was a little bit of recreation because it was a new person kind of leading it, but also trying to honor what it had been. And I'm going to try not to geek out because I think it was my favorite part of my job this whole last year.
And what's geeky about that?
Well, I'm going to geek out if I talk about it too much.
Just hit me with the top end stuff. Hit me with 30,000 foot view on this.
So Feminism, Voices,
Coming in
and
with
Visions.
Sylvia Plath.
Because I noticed you didn't come.
I was going to, and unfortunately I got caught up in bass fishing, playing with fireworks, getting a tattoo, and I think shaving my back. It was all very manly.
Ooh.
And unfortunately, I just couldn't. The oil and water and that, it kept me away, unfortunately. I planned on it.
Manly's another problematic word, right?
For me, apparently it is.
So I will explain this as if you didn't come this year because you didn't.
Explain it to me as if I wasn't part of the audience.
Yeah. So we had a really good turnout. But the idea is that it's a shared evening. It's normally an hour and a half of content and discussion. And the content, so I curate a lot of poems that have, some kind of feminist connection. And then Dr. Beth Keebler-Wolf pulls together some pieces of art that are on the same theme. And then it's all about trying to find volunteers, whether that be staff, faculty, students, who can come in and do a reading. So the main part of the event is basically the performance of those poems. We had photography where someone would come up and read the artist's statement for that work. And then the end is a discussion of kind of everything that was seen. And I think my big word, because I think in words, obviously, right? You've met me where I have a day where there's one word that just sticks in my head.
Right.
My word for the event was representation. And so I did my best to try to find as many different types of voices to represent as many different types of themes as I possibly could this year, which is a tall ask.
Yeah.
For me, the student response to it was something I had never experienced. Not just this event, but me personally going to something.
Extremely negative. Is that what you're going?
Exactly. No. I had a student who was in one of my classes, so he kind of touched base with me on Monday, the week after, that he came for the extra credit, because I offered extra credit, but that it had given him a platform to have a really interesting, deep conversation with his mom that weekend.
Really? Now, your extra credit was a bribe then?
It was, which a lot of professors use around here to get students to come to things.
Right, deep conversation with his mother on that.
Yeah, he said he had learned so much in just listening to the different perspectives that he went home that weekend and he asked his mom, I want to know how your experience is different from me and Dad.
Oh.
And then he asked about certain things, like, what was this like for you? What was this like to be, I don't want to get into his family dynamic that he shared, but,
Sure.
And they had a real honest conversation about how their experiences are different. And he came back and he basically said, thank you for that. So
Wow.
I think he came for the extra credit. I think that's the moral of my story, and he got something more out of it.
What was the turnout for this?
The turn, like numbers.
Yeah.
I didn't count, and there was some that were coming and going, but at one time, I think my best guess is maybe 60.
That's quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's a great turnout, I think.
It was more than I was expecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think during my man's day, which also included Hawaiian shirt wearing and bowling, was in there. My word, again, was ascertain. Since go back to the beginning of the podcast, I'm going to use that all over. But can you ascertain me those fireworks so I can try to blow the house up again?
I think your social norms for what it means to be masculine are fascinating to me.
Oh, you'd be surprised. It all revolves around Army men, fireworks, and probably Bugs Bunny and some other stuff that you think you could probably do stuff you saw in a cartoon.
That says more about you than you realize.
Right. I'm pretty sure I could fly off this roof. I used to jump off the roof all the time with bed sheets just to see.
I don't know if that's
fly.
Masculine. I did that when I was 4.
Oh no, it's just stupid.
I did $2
Make
general
no mistake.
grocery bags off of a barn roof when I was 4.
How'd that work out?
Not great.
Does it explain a few things?
I have this memory. I remember my mother running over to me and I was crying and she asked, "Where does it hurt?" And I was crying because it didn't work, not because it hurt.
It's a disappointment cry.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
and I wanted to figure it out. Why didn't it work?
That's a wholly different kind of experience.
Yeah.
We talked about, one other time, we talked about the emotions. I'm going to go back to villains for a second, and then we're going to wrap things up here pretty quick. We talked about the emotional aspects of villains. You talked something about that. We originally referenced that. It was something about how we as people will engage with villains in a certain way. Like I talked about early, the whole idea, do you hate the villain or do you love the villain? How does that emotional aspect play into our feelings? Because I might really hate some villain and you're like, I kind of dig them. How is that? What does that work into there?
I think first thing that comes to my mind is there's a real empathy building that can happen whenever you encounter a character, whether it be TV, movie, or literature, that is different from you.
Okay.
Early in my reading, I liked the characters that validated the way that I thought about the world because it gave me the language to talk about what I thought.
Okay.
But as I got older, and especially college age, I loved the characters that were so vastly different from myself because it either, one, built my perspective and showed me different ways to think, even if I didn't agree, or 2, it built my empathy. And I think villains can be really useful for building empathy if they're a fully rounded, thought-out character.
Okay.
And I think empathy is such an important skill. It's one of those skills that kind of transcend any career you'd ever want to go into.
I could see that too.
And
do you think that it really only boils down to villains are only really 2 types, the ones that you do hate and the one that you do love, and there's nothing in between?
I don't think so.
I'm kind of wondering here, I'll give you an example. Joaquin Phoenix as the new Caesar in Gladiator with Russell Crowe. Okay, I hate that guy. And the thumb thing didn't exist until like the 11th or 14th century, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That is kind of a strange one because you really, really hate that guy versus, say, Tom Hanks in Road to Perdition. It's a good movie, and he kind of liked the guy. Even the Joker with Heath Ledger in The Dark Knight, you kind of dig this guy.
Yeah.
Let me give you one that's in the middle. Lex Luthor in Batman versus Superman, The Dawn of Justice. We got Jesse Eisenberg comes in.
Eisenberg.
I don't know what to think about this guy. Therefore, I just can't engage with that.
I think it's less of a spectrum of do you love or dislike this villain, and it's more a spectrum of like how human is this villain.
Oh, that's interesting. I thought about that.
Yeah, because we're all going to have moments in our life where to someone else we do something that is villainous, right? You can't avoid that. It's very human. And so if I can see beyond an action and kind of see the humanity behind someone, and maybe they're doing something with very just cause.
I get you. In other words, I agree, and I could kind of get past the idea of all the death and murder and everything going on with this as long as it has kind of a Thanos mentality to it.
Maybe we shouldn't get past it, but if I can understand,
just okay it.
There's more power in that. And I think the more you read, I know you're a great reader too, like the more versions of humanity you're able to see. And I
Yeah.
know there's other like avenues where that's possible, but I think in literature, that's something that I've always respected is I can be at home and I can have access immediately to so many different perspectives that aren't my own.
Yeah. Could see that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating rabbit hole. See what I did there?
You're very round in your logic and everything. I have only really one last question. Your last name, McCorkle, is this a typo? Because there's just MCCOR. Is there
Kaylee?
like a Q in there?
I see.
Scottish?
So my last name isn't really my last name. It has been my entire existence,
Okay.
but my family.
I don't know if that sentence right there makes any sense. That's a nonsense.
Well,
It will.
it's the right person to speak nonsense, right? Or was there an excess of meaning there just now?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, I think so.
Like, from
Different
this side,
perspectives.
right?
So my family, we know our genealogy back to the 1400s. It's a pet project of my family to kind of figure it out. Always has been since my grandpa started it. And we were Scottish. And we hopped over to Ireland before we came to the Americas. And in doing so, we had to get rid of our very Scottish name,
Which was?
McCorkle.
Oh, that's preposterous. That's a preposterous.
So we became McCorkles performatively. This is my word today, maybe performatively.
It seems to be.
Yeah.
Just
So there
like
you
4
go.
or 5 times it's come up, or twice, whatever.
Yeah.
That's an interesting etymology for that, and I'm sure I'm not going to remember it. Being that I think you've told me
McCorkle.
this a couple of times now, and I still don't remember that. Corkadale.
I
That doesn't
actually
make any sense.
I did one of those ancestry DNA kits, and
And?
I have more Scottish than the average Scottish person today.
Really?
Yeah.
I did one a couple years ago, and I find that there was a lot more beer, I think, from my ancestors and where people came from.
Yeah.
Because my dad's dad was from Kentucky, and my mom's parents were all from northern Indiana. So what is that? Beer. I
Yeah.
guess that's where all we're coming from on that. Which I'm not a big drinker, so that works out just fine with me.
It's
I'm starting my own gene pool
There you go. It's
right now,
fascinating
here on out.
how we gain identity, though,
I'm
right?
stopping the past right now, and I'm moving forward with my new, which
You're
I'm not
forming
sure,
identity.
which is going to be Snickers bars. I think that's my ancestry.
Okay, Snickers
Thanks for
bars.
coming to the podcast today.
Absolutely. Fun conversation. I kind of forgot this was here.
We didn't. We got every word that you said, and this
Oh,
is going
no.
to be used in the court order, I believe, that we're going to be using later on. Hope you enjoyed the show today, folks. We got Chelsie McCorkle. Stay tuned next time.